Good morning. Welcome to our week 2 lecture. This week we're going to talk about revising, and your 2 readings are over revising. So this week you're working on your Project 1 rough drafts, and then next week you're going to be revising Project 1 after you receive my feedback. So I wanted to spend some time talking about revision and what you're going to be doing next week. The biggest difference between amateur writers and professional writers is knowing how to revise. Professional writers spend the majority of their time revising and making changes to their drafts. And there are 3 steps of this revision step of the writing process, and we're going to go through all 3 in this order. So when you start to revise, the first thing you do is revision, and you will make content level changes, big changes to your writing. Maybe you don't have a thesis statement. Maybe you aren't happy with your introduction. Maybe you want to move the paragraphs around, or maybe you thought of a better idea for one of your body paragraphs. So the step of the revision process is to make these big content level changes to your writing. Then the second step is editing. And when you edit, you look to make sentence level changes. So here, maybe you want to look at your sentence style or your word choice, or is your tone appropriate for your particular is your tone appropriate for the particular assignment. And then finally, you'll proofread, and that will be the last step. And this would be just the final step before you submit your essay, and this is when you look to make word level changes. Look at the grammar. Do you need to add punctuation? Did you run spell check? Did you check the formatting? If you're using sources in this particular essay, which we'll be doing at the end of the semester, are your citations correct? This is where you would make those changes. It makes sense to proofread last because in the first 2 steps of the revision process, you're making bigger changes. And so it makes sense to wait to proofread until you get to the very end and you're happy with your essay. Then you can go back and proofread and make the little changes. So last week we talked about myths in writing, and one revision myth is, if I'm doing it right, why would I need to revise? Well, some students just get so upset when they receive feedback from their instructor, or maybe they participated in peer review and they weren't happy with the feedback that they received from their classmate. Well, you didn't make a mistake. Revision is a good thing. Revision is essential to good writing. You can't write well without revising. And so we can't look at feedback negatively, but rather as an opportunity to make your writing even better. And so finally, I'd like to end with some revision tips that will help you revise your essays in our class. So the first most important thing to do when you revise is to try to make the essay seem unfamiliar to you. So what does that mean? Hopefully, by the time you get to the revision step of the writing process, you have looked at your own essay 1,000,000 times. And the more you look at it, the harder it is to find errors in your writing. So we need to think of a way to make it seem unfamiliar so that you can catch some of these errors that you might not catch because it's your own writing and you've read it so many times already. So one tip is to read your essay aloud. This way you can hear it. or ask someone to read it to you. Read it backwards, and by backwards I mean just start at the last sentence and read sentence by sentence, starting at the end, and maybe even covering up one line at a time so that you can focus on that one line, especially if you do have a hard time with grammar and you need to look at each sentence individually to make those corrections. This is something that might help you. Slow down. So often we rush through each step of the writing process, but you need to slow down when you revise so that you do catch some of these errors so that you can fix them. Maybe you can print off a copy if you have a printer, print it off and read it away from your computer. This way you're reading it in a different setting. Just read it slowly. Take time. Take a break between each part of the reading process and of the writing process. Maybe you worked on your draft yesterday and then you decided to set it aside for a day before you revise. And maybe after you revise and make the big changes, you want to set it aside again before you go over to look at the smaller errors when you edit. And again, when you proofread, to give yourself time in between each of the steps. Clearing your head is important when you revise, and taking a break between each part of the writing process. That's why I always say to start early. This way it gives you more time in between the steps. You don't want to get started the day before it's due, because then if the assignment's due tomorrow, you won't have any time for revision. And what we just looked at, we see that revision is one of the most important steps of the writing process, and you want to give yourself time for this step. So getting started early is the only way you'll have time to take a break and go through each step of the process slowly. Feedback is another useful part of the revision process. I will give you feedback on all of your writing assignments. So whenever I grade an assignment, there's a section in the assignment where it says comment, and I will leave you a note here with your notes for your revision. I also will use SpeedGrader to make notes in your actual essay. So whenever I'm finished grading an assignment, please go and look at the feedback, because this will be useful for you as you revise and as you work on your portfolio for the end of the semester. You might want to get feedback from a peer, maybe someone you live with, a friend, someone else that is taking the same class, or maybe has already taken a class. Maybe they will look at your essay for you and give you some feedback. Finally, Lindenwood Writing Center, you can make an appointment online, and they can do it over online, or you can even drop in and make an appointment to meet with someone in person if you are nearby. But this is also very helpful in the revision process, to have someone else look at your essay and to get feedback from multiple people. Another idea is to make a reverse outline. What you do after you write your essay, you go through and you make an outline to see that it's going where you want it to go and it's doing what you want. So you would go on and make, each body paragraph, you would make an outline of that, so you can make sure that you have all of your main points and they're in the order that you would like them to be, and that you have an introduction and that you have a conclusion and that all the parts are there. A lot of times using an outline to begin with is useful, but making a reverse outline at the end can also double check your work to make sure that your essay is flowing and organized the way you had originally planned. And finally, just make a plan. You know that each of your essays are going to be revised, so make a plan early for how you're going to go about revising your essay. So just write it down. First I'm going to do this, second I'm going to do this, and finally I'm going to proofread or whatever. But making a plan so that you stick by it and go through the steps of revision is the best way to make sure that you take time for this important part of the writing process. So now you can go ahead and take your reading quiz for the week and just reach out if you have any questions. Have a great week, you guys.